Hello and welcome to Salem Voices. I'm Lucy Rose, your host, and I'm so excited today to introduce you to our very special guest coming to us from the Pacific Northwest, Noel Lumpkin. Good morning, Noel. How are you?
Great, Lucy. How are you?
I'm really good. Actually, I said Pacific Northwest. I should have been more specific. You're in Washington State, right?
Yes, that's correct.
I love it. And she's been willing to join us very early in the morning, her time. So it's amazing. Her eyeballs are even open and I can see them. So thank you, Noel.
It's my pleasure.
Yeah, it's good to have you. And I have to say, you have one of the most interesting stories of anybody I've interviewed. And I've interviewed several people now, all of them with interesting stories. But my guess is you're going to tell a story that a lot of folks have not even heard of before as an option, especially in medicine. So you went from being a Salem senior to an anesthesiologist to a locum tenens physician, which is what my guess is most people have never even heard of, to actually working on medical missions and then working on one of the coolest places to work, I think, ever, the Mercy ships. So as we kind of begin this, I just have to say what an impact you've made in your life and how cool it is to have you tell us that story. So if you will, let's just get started. If you can fill us in briefly on your post-Salem journey from a Salem senior to where you are today in, I don't know, 5 minutes or less. Tell us about Noel and your journey.
Well, as you may or may not know, my undergraduate degree was economics, management, and French.
That makes sense. Continuing.
Yes, it's a typical degree for going to medical school. In fact, Steve Noel told me for years I was the only economics French major that went to medical school that he taught.
That's not
so. That was, yes.
Yeah.
So I did not immediately go to medical school after Salem. I worked for about 4.5 years in different jobs. And I got to a point where I felt like it was time to go back to school. And I was thinking at that time, should I get an MBA and further the business end of it? But in the back of my mind was Steve Noel saying, you should really consider medicine. You should go further with this. And I thought it was then or never. And so I decided I would try and do some of the prerequisites for medicine and see if I still liked it. And I took all the prerequisites in a single year, took the MCATs, and then got into medical school, which is not how I recommend doing it for the average person.
I don't recommend that today, but unbelievable.
No, it was rather arduous, as you might imagine. And I went to medical school and then did my residency at Mayo. And I came out to Seattle for a meeting and I decided I want to be in the Northwest. And so I came out and did a fellowship in Seattle and then have stayed here ever since. And after working here for about 5 years, I decided, again, I was getting restless and I had gone to a meeting. It's something about these meetings, I guess. And I met another anesthesiologist who worked part-time as a locums and part-time at Bowman Gray.
No way.
And I thought, part-time locums. They'd filled in for us when someone had surgery or whatever. And I thought, this is intriguing. And I thought maybe I should try that because I just felt like I was spending too much of my day and too much of my time in non-medical work. And that I went to medical school to be a physician, not to go to meetings.
Okay.
And so I jumped off into the deep end, right into full-time locum tenens and told myself, I'll give this 2 years and see if this works out. And I've been doing it full time now for over 15 years. So I guess I answered that question for myself and said, this works for me. But it's great. It's allowed me a lot of flexibility in how I plan my schedule. And it's allowed me to go on medical missions, which would be very difficult if I was still in a full-time position at a hospital or especially at an academic institution.
Okay. And
so that's where I am at.
We're going to build on the medical missions part in just a few minutes because that's so interesting and clearly so impactful in your life and in others. But can you tell folks really what a locum tenens is? I mean, I don't want to call it a substitute teacher, if you know what I mean, but you're filling in for other docs that are either not there, off on vacation, doing whatever, but long-term, right?
Yes.
Tell folks what that is.
Well, locum tenens is something that even other physicians don't understand so much how it works. It's a bit of a mystery. And I get people ask me all the time, oh, is that something new? Because they're familiar with the idea of nurses that travel, but physicians, they're not. And yet it's been around for almost 50 years now. And it started initially to fill vacancies in rural, underserved communities. And it has grown significantly. In fact, there are about 30 agencies in the US that handle these kinds of roles.
Whoa.
And it's a $2 billion industry in the US alone. And so it continues to grow because there's such a shortage of physicians nationwide in every specialty, but particularly primary care, as you might imagine. And people are having a hard time filling positions. And so I go up to places where they've had people that have left, people that have retired, people that have died, and they just need people to fill in and do the work. And there is always work for every specialty. People think, oh, it's just primary care or anesthesiology specifically tailored for locum tenens, because I don't have to build on a clinic. But it continues to grow and will continue to grow as the physician population like me will age and retire soon, and the shortage will only increase in the next 2 decades.
Wow. What an incredible way to see the world too. And I think, when I look at you, I can actually see the glimmer in your eye already when I just mentioned that. It's really neat. Do you have a favorite place that you have been as a locum tenens that you served? And if so, what might that be?
I have been very fortunate to go all over the US. I've gone all the way to Maine and worked in a little town in southern Maine, right on the coast, where I was able to I could go to my grocery store and have them steam a lobster for me while I did my grocery shopping and pick that up and take it home, which to me was just unbelievable. I'd only had lobster flown in and never had it just right there at the grocery store.
You get great crabs out where you live, but not the lobster.
Yes. Well, yes. Now I have the other kind of shellfish.
Yeah.
And I think that, there are every place I've been, and I've been to some places that people go, oh, you went there? But there's always something everywhere you go that offers a new glimpse of the United States.
Yeah.
And even if I've gone to hospitals or practices that I didn't care for, there was something amazing everywhere I went. And so there's not any one place. I mean, I've been going up to Alaska, as you know, for 10 years now on a pretty regular basis. And Alaska is astounding. I tell people, if you haven't put that on your bucket list, you need to put it high on your list. Every time I go there, I feel like I need a passport because it's such a different state compared to the rest of the United States. So I think Alaska really has to rank high on the list, if not the top place I've been to in terms of what I've seen and what I've done and the people. People think, oh, Alaska, everyone lives in igloos, and I'm always astounded at how people are so ignorant of what Alaska is actually like. And I'm like, Anchorage is very cosmopolitan. And people are astounded. Even people that travel well are astounded when I say that. They say that the Anchorage school system, there's 140 languages that are spoken in the school system there.
Whoa.
And people they don't believe that. And I'm like, no, it's true. You won't believe the number of people that come through Alaska, even as a temporary worker. There are tons of temporary workers in Alaska, and it brings all kinds of cultures and languages and experiences to the city. So I think Alaska has to be my favorite place, and I've gone there a lot. So I think it speaks well of it.
Okay, now you've talked about the people there, but clearly there are other aspects of Alaska, I think, that have piqued your interest. The out of doors, the natural beauty. Are there things that you love to explore? I love the thought of Alaska because it's one of my favorite places as well. If somebody were to go based on what you just said about bucket list, what else would you say they must see while they're there?
Well, I think if you go to Alaska, I say you have to spend at least 2 weeks because it takes a long time to get there. Even for me, even we're the neighboring state, it takes 3.5 hours to 4 hours to fly there.
Yeah.
And everything is spread out. I think people know, oh yeah, Alaska's big. And, my brother lived in Texas. And so he's like, oh, it's big. And I'm like, Alaska's the size of 2 Texas.
Yeah.
It's bigger than California, Texas, and Montana combined. And so to get to other places in Alaska, it takes a long time to travel there. So I'd say you have to plan a long time up there. And I would say you don't have to leave Anchorage to see wildlife. You can see moose, you can see bald eagles, you can even see bears in Anchorage. You don't have to leave the city to see wildlife. And that is another thing that shocks people. And I would always advise people, if you go there, you really ought to plan to take the train. The Alaska Railroad's amazing. They sell a guidebook that tells you all the stops along the way, things that its history, things you should look for. And if there's a spectacular site, they'll stop the train so that people can take photos. So it's just a great experience. And if you like the outdoors, well, it's pretty tough to beat. You can hike, you can canoe, you can kayak, you can ski, whatever you want. And of course, hunt and fish, if that is your desire. There's really no limit to what you can do in Alaska.
I love it. And I think the Alaska Tourist Bureau should give you a shout out. Very nice job. It is very cool though. And there is a reason that you are drawn to go back and do more locum tenens there, clearly.
Yes.
So cool. I have to pick up on something you said though, when you're telling us about your journey. You mentioned Steve Nolgren. You mentioned you did not major in science at all at Salem, but clearly you took at least a few courses or Steve wouldn't have seen that promise in you. But my real question to you is, if Salem did not necessarily, if they're not responsible for developing the science aspect of you fully, since you took a lot of it outside Salem post-graduation, what did Salem give you? What soft skills and what did you learn at Salem that gave you the perseverance, the character, whatever it is, to succeed in med school, to go to Mayo, to have the residency, to do all this? What did Salem build for you in terms of that support system to be able to be as successful as you were as you started the rest of your career?
Well, I think the one thing that is, I think, underappreciated about Salem is the size. And everyone goes, oh, it's a small college. And I say, that's not a detriment. That's one of its strengths.
Yeah.
Because what it offers that you can't get at a university is accessibility. Steve Nolgren taught my biology course. He was the chair of the biology department.
Yeah.
That never happens in a university. The chairman of the department is never teaching a freshman level course. It is taught by a TA or some other assistant professor or teaching clinician. And to have that accessibility to the chairman of the department and be able to talk about what he liked about his specialty, and for him to talk to me about what he saw in me, that accessibility just isn't found in a great large institution. And I think that was what gave you that ability to talk to people who were the big people, you know, and they were real people, you know, they're not some ivory tower, you know, resident that you can't touch unless you've gone through all these other layers.
Right.
You sat down and had lunch with them in the refectory, you know, and you were on committees with them or, you know, any number of activities. And I think that being able to talk to people of all levels of education, backgrounds, and so forth, and have immediate access to them is something that you just can't replace with reading a textbook or attending a huge lecture. To be able to sit down and talk with these people as real people was a huge asset. And I think in terms of just being able to deal with people of all backgrounds. And I think that the liberal arts aspect of Salem is another thing. I've heard so many people say, oh, the liberal arts education is outdated. We need more specialization. And I say, au contraire. I think there's a saying, it says, if the only tool you have is a hammer, then every problem becomes a nail. And I think if you are so specialized, then the only tool you have is a hammer. Whereas being at Salem, you learn there are lots of other tools out there because you're going to have lots of other problems besides nails. And I think that's what Salem gave you, was a broader look at things and a way to approach problems with so many different aspects than you would have if you just had the single focus.
So let's play with that just a second. Think about problem solving. What are the attributes one needs that you really get from a liberal arts education that really help you be a master problem solver, if you know what I mean. The critical thinking skills, as an example, are vital. Being able to identify the problem clearly before you can even begin to solve it. But what are the things you learned from that liberal arts education that you took with you that have helped you be that problem solver as we think about it? Because taking courses are one thing, but the outcomes of those courses that changed you as a person are something else entirely to a great extent. So what do you think you actually learned from those courses that have helped you been successful?
Well, I think that when you're taking, as a senior, for example, I was taking an accounting class, I was taking logic, I was taking a high level French class. And every hour you were changing gears on how you were focusing on this class.
Yeah.
And so it wasn't like you took, like when I took all my science classes in a single year to get into medical school, it was draining because it was only thinking a certain way. Whereas in liberal arts, you're having to switch gears all the time. And I think it lends itself to creating more flexibility and looking at things with a different lens than you would if you just focused one way. So I think it gives you so much more flexibility in the way you think and in the way you look at things.
Okay, super. Thank you. All right, we're going to change gears a bit now because you've been now in your professional life for a while, not too long, but for long enough to have huge amounts of experience. And you have clearly in your life made a what I might call a real profound commitment to helping marginalized and health underserved communities around the world. In fact, you've been not only to the US and your locum tenens, as you talked about, but you've actually worked in missions, I think, in Ecuador. I'm going to name some of the things that I picked up from your resume: Ecuador, Zimbabwe, the Republic of Congo, Cameroon, Madagascar, one of my favorite places. I love the lemurs. You've done mission work and you've served on mercy ships. Where did that passion for service come from? And what has that meant to you?
Well, I think part of it comes from just my growing up. And I believe, from the Gospel of Luke, it says, to whom much is given, much is expected. And I think I've been greatly blessed with tremendous opportunities. And the idea, people say, oh, well, you earned the right to go to medical school. Well, yes, but I had the chance to earn that right to go to medical school. A lot of people don't have that chance. And I always believe that the idea is that you would give back in some fashion. It doesn't mean you have to go on a mission to Africa or South America, but that's how I've chosen to do it. And in doing locum tenens is how I've come across these mission opportunities. And I was working in Maine, as I mentioned earlier, and met a physician who has led teams down to Ecuador for several years. And I have joined him on 3 occasions in Ecuador. And I'm now the anesthesia team lead for the mission when we go. And when I was doing locums in Alaska, I met a nurse who had been with mercy ships, and she told me about mercy ships. And she says, oh, Noel, you really need to think about going on the mercy ships. And so I've gone now there, I think 3 times, and I would have gone a 4th time this year if it weren't for the pandemic. So it's, yeah, it's a powerful thing. And I think, people think, oh, you're doing a good deed. And I agree. Yes, I think it's a great deed. I think people who do missions are doing great things, but it's not a one-way street. And doing medical missions, especially if you are a physician or a nurse, is a great way of reinvigorating your interest in medicine. Because there's too much noise out there these days. There's a lot of frustrations. And when you go on a mission, you distill it down to simply taking care of patients, which is what most of us went into medicine for. And I think if you're thinking, I am so frustrated, I don't know what I want to do, I don't know if I want to keep doing this. And I think a mission is a great way to bring it back to where you started. And I think that that's another reason why I keep doing it, because I want to give back, but I get so much back myself when I go on these missions.
I hear you talk, and I can't imagine the stories that you've accumulated over the years. Those that have touched your heart, those where your work has touched the heart of others in ways that's meaningful and changed their lives. Is there one that you feel comfortable sharing that really could illustrate the kind of impact it either makes on you or those you serve, or both, that would be particularly interesting to folks listening?
Well, I think one incident that stands out in my mind is when I was on the mercy ships the very first time. I was walking down the hallway of the ORs. And I heard singing on the other side, which was the patient wards. And I said, is that singing I hear? And they're like, oh yes, that's the OBF ladies. And I'm like, okay. And they go, they sing every Friday. Now, OBF stands for obstetric fistula. And this is a problem we almost never see in the US.
Yeah.
But in Africa and even South America, it is seen. It's women who, during childbirth, who don't have access to C-sections. They labor for sometimes days. And maybe they deliver the baby, maybe they don't. Yeah. But they end up with these tracts between the reproductive organs and the rectum or the bladder, and they leak and they smell and they get shunned by their families. They're cast out. They are outcast. And these women came to the mercy ships so that they could get those repaired. They've endured hardships that we can't even begin to imagine. And yet, when they had the chance to come to mercy ships, the first thing they did is realize there are other patients here. There are children on board. Yeah. And we need to make them feel better. So they got up out of their beds every Friday and sang, walking down the halls. And when I was in Madagascar, I got to go to one of their graduations. These women have spent months at mercy ships, having surgery after surgery. They've been staying at what we call the Hope Center, where it's like a large dormitory. And so when they leave, they're given a new dress, a hat, a bag, and they get up and speak a few words. So they thank mercy ships, and they thank the doctors, and they thank the nurses. But the one person they all thanked was the cook. The cook. And at first when he said that, I thought, well, that's cute. But then every single one of them thanked the cook. And I realized with everything they've been through, they thank the one person we often fail to thank. And it was a profound moment. I had tears in my eyes, and still I can think about it and realize there's nothing so bad that's happened to you that you can't give hope to someone else. And there's nothing so bad that's happened to you that you can't turn and thank the overlooked person. And that's a lesson that I have kept with me ever since. And it's a profound lesson, and I can't thank mercy ships enough for the opportunity to have seen that and heard that and carry that with me now.
How do we continue after that? My next question was going to be about the mercy ships, but I think you've really put that in perspective already. What's it like to work on one? You shared one of the most profound stories I've heard ever that brings me to tears as well. I can't even imagine. And you're so right. And I think especially in a time like now, for all of us to remember that is just so vital. But what's it like to work on a mercy ship? And do you have to be a medical provider or medical practitioner to be able to work on one? If there are folks who are listening that you're inspiring with a story like that, or is there room for people to work on a mercy ship? And what's it like?
Absolutely. On any given week, there are close to 400 people on board.
Okay.
And yes, they are there to provide medical services. But because mercy ships goes to a certain port for usually 10 months at a time, so they're docked in port. People think we're sailing on the ocean. No, they're docked. But because of that, there are people that stay on the mercy ships long term. Okay. I usually go for a couple of weeks, but there are nurses that go for a month or more, and some go for a full year, and some go for 2 years or more. So there is a fully accredited K through 12 school on board.
Ah.
There is a coffee shop. There is, of course, the dining hall.
Yeah.
And because it is a large ship, there's a captain and then the entire crew that keep the ship operating. Yeah. So we've had surgeons that have come on board whose wives have worked in the coffee area, who have taught school. So there are any number of roles. And if you go to their website, you'll see a list of roles that they have. And there are people I've worked with. One of the surgeons I worked with, Dr. Gary Parker, he and his wife had literally raised their children on board. He has been on the mercy ships for over 25 years. Their children went to school on the mercy ships, and
Wow.
are now in college. So there are any number of roles you can play, and don't be defined by the fact that you're not medical.
Wow. My guess is you may have inspired someone to join you in that kind of journey.
Well, I hope so. I hope so. I'm their speakers bureau. So I believe in talking about it and telling people that there are many ways you can serve the underserved people worldwide. You don't have to be a doctor. You don't have to be a nurse. You don't even have to know biology.
Okay. So you don't have to have studied under Steve or any of our.
No. My apologies to Steve Nolgren. You don't have to take biology to go on mercy shifts, but
Okay.
it can help.
Huh. Speaking of you being on their speakers bureau, I know that you're a leader. You're a health innovator because not only are you a locum tenens doc, you've really helped forward that whole specialty area of medicine, I know, in a leadership role there. You clearly are the problem solver I set up just a few minutes ago and are really good at that, including further, again, honing that whole locum tenens profession. What would you say is your most important leadership learning along the way? Salem's committed clearly to developing leaders, who are going to make an impact on our world, as have you, and as have so many of our graduates, before and after you and will in the future. What's your most important leadership lesson you might want to share, and how did Salem help prepare you for being a leader?
Well, I think what Salem helps so much is to not place limits on yourself.
Yeah.
I think it's very easy to get pigeonholed, and people think, oh, you're this kind of person, or this is your kind of forte, or whatever. And I think if you had told me 25 years ago that I was going to be an anesthesiologist doing medical missions, I would have said, you are crazy. But it's because of people like Steve Nolgren who encouraged me along the way. It wasn't just at Salem, it was afterwards.
Yeah.
And the idea that you could set any path you want. And when I was on the alumni board several years ago, and I heard the current students who were talking about how they'd expanded the major and minor roles and interests and so forth at Salem, I was so excited by that, because I think you shouldn't limit yourself. And I think, they say that you should do one thing every day that scares you. Well, I don't know if you have to do it every day, but I think every year you should be working on something that is beyond your current level of expertise, and you should be pushing yourself. And I think that's what Salem always did. They allowed you to keep pushing the envelope in terms of what you thought you could do, because that's the only way you can grow. And I think that's what Salem does, is give you the opportunity to advance yourself. The only one that puts limits on you is you, and Salem helps you redefine those limits.
Wow. Yeah, thank you. It does. It certainly did for me as well. There's no question about that. And as you look at yourself as a leader, and you look at other leaders, because you've clearly been in contact with lots of them through your life, are there certain attributes that you would say are important attributes for being a successful leader? Are there things that jump to mind that folks should be aware of in terms of developing their own strengths?
I think that a good leader that, is someone who listens to those who are smarter than they are. I think it's easy if you get to a position of authority to think you know all the answers. And I think that's the most dangerous place to be when you're a leader. I think you have to be willing to humble yourself. I think a true leader is humble. A true leader is a servant. And I think that being able to listen and serve are the two qualities I find most attractive in the leaders that I try and emulate.
It's funny you should use that term servant. There's actually a whole kind of leadership thought process called the servant as leader that a gentleman named Bob Greenleaf started a number of years ago. And you can still read a lot about that thought process, what it is to be a servant leader. So it's really cool to me that you would bring that up, and that you probably found that for yourself, not necessarily studying it in that way.
Right.
Yeah, thank you. And it takes me then to think about the number of women, or the percentage of women, which is quite low, that actually are in senior leadership positions in health in these days. It's only 25% of the senior leaders in health right now are women. So a very low number. How important in your mind is it for us to close that gap, to have more women in senior leadership roles in health and healthcare?
Well, while I think that it's important for women to serve as leaders, I think that an impact can be made whether you're holding a leadership position or not. And I think that it's easy to think, oh, it's the most visible thing is to see people in a leadership position. But I think that in some ways, your impact can be even greater if you're not in that leadership position. As I've seen in medicine, the higher you go in leadership, the further away you get from medicine. And that's why I have stepped away from holding an actual position, because I enjoy doing the medicine more than I do the administrative part. That being said, I think that Salem helps everyone realize that there's no reason a woman can't be a leader, because every position in student government at Salem is held by a woman. So it does give you that impetus if you want. But I think that there are many more ways to make an impact without being in charge.
Oh my, I wish we had another hour to explore that thought, because you've opened a beautiful door that I wish we could just kind of like run right through now and explore that whole thing, because there is something really, really important to be said about you can lead at every level. Every person can lead, and not only should they, but the importance of all seeing ourselves as leaders. You're absolutely right. The title or position does not actually make you a leader.
Right.
They give you the authority, but it doesn't necessarily give you the leadership capabilities that you need. And there's nothing that prevents one from being a very effective leader, no matter where they are in the organization. So it'd be really fun to explore that further. I wish we had more than the time allocated. That's all I got to say. So thank you for bringing that piece up, because we do focus, you're right, a lot on the gap. And I do think we need to fill that gap. There need to be more women represented, as more women make decisions about health than men do in the world. And there are more women workers in the health industry than there are men. So I think the gap is important to close, but you brought up just such an important piece for all of us, that we all are leaders wherever we are in the organization.
Right. Absolutely.
Oh, thank you. Wow. All right. Before we turn to Salem specific questions, I got one more for you, because you are a leader at every level that you are, wherever you are in that moment, committed to improving US and global health. Clearly, that is where your interest is. So I just ask a quick question. This is an easy one, I'm sure. Wink, wink. Okay. If you had a magic wand and you could fix just one aspect of health, and you can wave that wand and say, okay, this is going to be right now, broadly defined in our country today, what would that be? If you could make one thing really better, and how might we do that?
Well, my wish is probably not for what you think.
Okay.
The problem we have in medicine, and have had for decades, really probably even a century now, and it's the problem of physician suicide. It is a greatly underestimated problem, and physicians kill themselves at a rate double that of the average US population. More physicians have died from suicide than have died from COVID-19, despite our daily exposure. Nearly every person I know has known at least one physician who has committed suicide. I personally have known 3.
Oh my.
It's estimated that every year 1 million Americans lose a physician to suicide. I have 2 good friends, well, one really good friend, Lynette Charity, who has taken this under her banner. She's now retired from anesthesiology. She is a speaker. She has spoken with Kevin MD, and this is one of her main topics. And I think that people say, oh, well, why is that? You're the brightest, you're hardworking, you're successful. Why would you kill yourself? And therein lies the problem. People who go into medicine, they're driven, they're motivated, they work hard, they do all the work that's required, and usually extra credit. And because of that, people think, oh, I don't worry about him or her, because they always do what's expected. And so I think the problem needs to start being managed at the college level.
Okay.
You have the bright students and you think, oh, they always are going to do well. Yes, they are. But you need to sit down and visit with them and tell them there are a lot of tough lessons ahead if you're going into medicine. And you need to have resources built in early on to help you cope with them. Yes, it would take more than a magic wand to fix, but it is a huge problem. And we don't need to be doing ourselves in when we're already in short supply as it is. And I think that we need to heal the healers, and we need to be able to allow physicians to talk about these problems in a way that we're not allowed to talk about. We're not encouraged to seek help if we're depressed. We're not encouraged to seek help if we're despondent. And that needs to change. And that needs to change at every level. And not just in the United States, but that's the one I'm most familiar with. And I think it's something that is just under-recognized. There are lots of problems with medicine right now, but that's one that just isn't talked about.
No, it's not. And thank you so much. You're right. It is not what I expected you to say.
Mhm.
And yet it is maybe the most profound thing you could have said, because without folks like you and your friends that you have unfortunately lost to this, none of the healthcare could be what it is. So I just, yeah, I have so many other questions I'm going to ask you, but just one quick follow up to this because it's so unexpected for me. Are medical schools, do you think today, and I know you graduated a while back, but do you think medical schools are addressing this and residency programs in ways that are helpful yet or meaningful enough, shall I say yet?
From my own perspective, my answer is no.
Okay.
When I was in medical school, my father died right before I got into medical school. And my fiance died while I was in medical school. And no one ever bothered to ask, are you doing okay? I was struggling with school. And when I look back now, I realize it was because I was depressed.
Yeah.
It was never addressed. No one ever sought me out to see if I needed any kind of help. It was just just tough it out. You'll get through this.
Yeah.
And that's not how you deal with these problems. And residency was maybe slightly better. I had some mentors there that I went to and I spoke to, but it was still less than adequate from my perspective.
So not just opportunity for change, but necessity for change.
Right. And I think that that's one place where, even though it seems like a stereotype, that's one place where I think women in medicine can and will address this more directly than the average male will. They tend to keep things closed in. And I think women are more likely to speak out. And the two that I do know speak out are both women.
Okay.
And I think that that is an area of impact that without having a leadership role, you could make a huge impact in medicine.
I agree. Thank you for bringing that up. Really, thank you. So now we're going to turn to, I hope, fond memories for you. We're going to do just a little bit here on Salem, and I'm going to start like I do with everybody that I've interviewed, with just asking a few really quick, like one-word answer questions, just to kind of bring those memories back, get the juices flowing, though you've talked about Salem a lot already. But first, what was your favorite course at Salem?
Biology.
It was biology. How about that? Even though you didn't major in that at all?
No, I had everything planned out, but yes, it was a surprise.
I love that. Clearly it was one of mine as well. I love that.
Yes.
Okay, I think I know the answer to this, but I'm going to give you one more chance. What faculty member had the greatest impact on you?
Steve Nolgren.
Okay, I was going to take that big guess. All right, and he, I love him dearly as well. And there are going to be many, many people who watch this interview right now who say the same thing.
They're going to be nodding their heads.
They're going to be nodding their heads right with you. And his little flower every day, and his boutonniere. So, what was your favorite tradition, Noel, at Salem?
I loved Christmas in Old Salem. I loved the Christmas ceremonies. I loved the singing, Angels We Have Heard on High with the candle lit. Oh, it brings tears to my eyes when I think about it. And just the beauty of Old Salem. It's a beautiful place, but at Christmas, it's spectacular.
Okay, I love that. And where was your favorite place on campus to go and recharge or think or just to find peace and relax? Where would we find Noel if we couldn't find her in the science building or in her residence hall room?
Well, I worked in the library every year I was at Salem, and I did enjoy the library. But when I really wanted to study and be by myself, I went to the day student center, because at night there were no day students there. So I always had it to myself. And all the time I was there, no one ever found out about
That's what I was going to bet. Because by your choosing that at night when all the day students weren't there at all, none
Right.
of the folks who lived on campus probably even knew that it was where you were hiding at all. And so
No,
you had total peace and quiet.
I did. It was quiet, and furthermore, it was air conditioned, which was a big thing back when I was at
How
Salem.
about that? Yeah, and times have changed dramatically since.
Yes, yes, they have,
A whole
thankfully.
lot of commuter students now, a lot of them.
Yeah,
Commuters, not day students per se, but
right.
commuters. And places for them to hang out and be and all of that are very different than then. But
Yes.
back in the days when you and I were there weren't many commuter students. So
No,
there
no.
wasn't a nicer place for that. So, oh, God bless you. That is so funny. You're the first person to say that. That's for sure.
I'm sure. I'm sure.
All right. I ask everybody this as well, and I think this is really important. You've shared some of it, but I'm just going to open it for any other thoughts about this. With folks like you, I mentioned the term Salem College, and your whole face lights up and your whole demeanor changes. And I'm calling it the secret sauce. Something clicks in your brain that makes you feel something, that you look back on that experience and you're feeling warm and you're feeling good. What is it about your experience that caused you to love your time there so much? How would you kind of put a finger on that?
I think what I love about Salem is that I was recognized as an individual. And I think it was very interesting when I took those science classes at a university after Salem. And there were more people in my inorganic chemistry class than in my entire graduating class of Salem.
Whoa.
And you weren't an individual. You were just a number in that class. And I think being respected as an individual at that point was pivotal in early adulthood, and being able to be recognized as a person who had merit, a person whose opinions could be listened to, whether they were right or wrong, but someone who would be listened to. And I think that developing that skill of being listened to and listening to others was a great skill that Salem helped plant in me.
Yeah. Wow. What a lovely thing to say as well. And you're right. And the whole concept of listening and being still and really actively listening is not easy.
No, especially today.
Especially today with everything else going on around us, and with dogs in the background and children climbing on people's laps in Zoom and doing all the other things that are going on. It's rather frenetic and it's harder, really harder. So thank you for bringing that piece back in. I'm going to ask you to reflect once more. You and I aren't 18 or 20 anymore. But some of the people that are listening to this will be.
Yes.
They want to learn from you. And I just ask you to reflect. If you could write that letter, knowing what you now know, back to your 20-year-old self, what words of wisdom might you give your 20-year-old self right now?
I think I would say it's okay to fail. It's okay to fail. You get to a point where you're doing well academically, you're recognized for your achievements, and you think that you can't fail, but you will fail at some point. And you don't burst into flames. The world doesn't end. Life goes on if you're willing to brush yourself off and get up and move. And there was a great speaker I listened to in Toastmasters once when he says, if you fall down, you fall forward. And that is still progress. And so I think it's a great lesson that failing is okay. And it teaches you something. And if you're willing to recognize the lesson in that failure, then you're going to make great strides. And I think that is something I wish I'd known then that I do know now, because I think at the time I didn't think it was okay to fail. And I'm telling that 20-year-old there at Salem, it's okay. It's okay. There's a lesson there. And find that lesson and you will be fine.
You talked earlier about doing something scary every day.
Yes, exactly.
You've never failed. You've never tried anything scary.
Exactly.
Because if you try something scary, you will fail.
You will.
But the concept in my mind, listening to you, is you still haven't failed. Because if you learn something from it, there's no real failure.
Exactly.
You get something from it and you do it different. And it brings up, to me, it conjures up those two leadership skills in essence, and that spirit inside of both courage and resilience, to find that inner self that says, I'm going to learn from this and I can do it again, or I can do even bigger things next time from what I learned.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah. Gosh, thank you. What a great lesson. So now we're going to end. It's time to end this thing. It seems like it's gone by like in 5 minutes. I can't believe it's been as long as it has, but
Can't either.
I wish it could be twice this long, because there's so many.
Me too.
I want to ask
this has been great.
I love this. I feel like a true sister. Isn't that funny when you go to Salem, how that somehow happens, right? It's really,
Absolutely.
that's part of the secret sauce to me, I guess. But I ask you, just as we wrap up, just look at the camera. You get the last word here. What would you like kind of your parting words to be? What do you want to leave the viewers with on this day, just from you? What's your thinking?
Well, I've listened to some of these Salem voices, and with you and the people that I've listened to, I'm truly humbled that I've been included in this group. And I know people want to know, oh, how can you influence Salem? But what I want to say to everyone out there is never underestimate the strength of your influence, the power that you have in encouraging others. No matter where you are, no matter your profession, you can make an impact, and you never know how far those words might carry you. So I think take the time to encourage someone, and those words will carry them through the tough times ahead.
Yeah, thank you. What a beautiful way to end this. Now I actually get to do the final ending almost, because we're going to do the real final ending together. But I get to say, on behalf of all of us in the Salem community, thank you. I'm not kidding. Sharing your journey, the impact that you're making in the world, you make us all really proud. And so on behalf of everybody, Noel, I just can't thank you enough. And before we go, I want to just remind our viewers as well that we'll be back again in 2 more weeks with another edition of Salem Voices. So I hope you'll watch the next one. But I know everybody joins me in thanking you, Noel. So thank you.
Well, thank you, Lucy, for doing all of this. I know it's a boatload of work to put this together, so I appreciate all that you're doing for Salem. It's really amazing. As I said before, you should be one of the Salem Voices. We're in it.
You're very kind. Thank you. But here, for now at least, we're going to end this together. And on 3, we're going to say Salem Strong. We can even do a fist bump if you want a virtual one. Why not?
Sure.
Right? So here we go. 1, 2, 3. Salem
Strong.